representing Ukraine, perform their first dive, 201B, degree of difficulty 2. Judges' scores for execution, 7, 7.5, 8, 8. Synchronization, 8, 8.5, 8, 8.5, 8.5. Next up, the team representing Canada will be performing a 401B, degree of difficulty 2. Judges' scores for execution, 7.5, 8, 8, 8. Synchronization, 8.5, 8, 8, 8, 8.5. Next on the boards, the team representing Mexico will be performing a 101B, degree of difficulty 2. Judges' scores for execution, 8, 8.5, 8, 7.5. For synchronization, 8.5, 8.5, 8, 8.5, 8.5. Forming a 401B, degree of difficulty 2. Judges' scores for execution, 8, 7, 8, 8. Synchronization, 8 across the board. Next up, the team representing Australia will be performing a 201B, degree of difficulty 2. Judges' scores for execution, 7.5, 6.5, 7.5, 7. Synchronization, 8, 8.5, 8, 8, 8. Team representing China will be performing a 101B, degree of difficulty 2. Judges' scores for execution, 8.5, 9, 9, 9. For synchronization, 9.5, 9.5, 9, 9, 9. Women's 3 metre synchronized springboard. Team from Ukraine will be performing a 301B, degree of difficulty 2. Scores for execution, 7, 7, 7.5, 7.5. Synchronization, 7.5, 8, 8, 7.5, 8.5. Team from Canada forming a 301B, degree of difficulty 2. Judges' scores for execution, 7.5, 8.5, 7.5, 8. For synchronization, 8.5, 8, 8.5, 8, 8.5. Forming a 301B, degree of difficulty 2. Judges' scores for execution, 8, 8, 8, 7.5. Synchronization, 8, 8.5, 8.5, 8.5, 8.5. Next, the team representing Great Britain will be performing a 301B, degree of difficulty 2. Judges' scores for execution, 7.5, 7.5, 8.5, 9. For synchronization, 8, 8, 8.5, 8.5, 8.5. Next up, the team from Australia will be performing a 301B, group difficulty 2. Judges' scores for execution, 7.5, 8, 7, 6.5. For synchronization, 7.5, 7, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5. Team from China will be performing a 5-3-3-1D, group difficulty 2. Judges' scores for execution, 8.5, 8.5, 8, 8.5. Synchronization, 9, 9, 8.5, 8.5, 9. Representing Ukraine, performing a 405B, group difficulty 3. Judges' scores for execution, 6.5, 6.5, 8, 7.5. For synchronization, 7, 8, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5. The team from Canada will be performing a 205B, group difficulty 3. Judges' scores for execution, 8, 8, 7.5, 8. Synchronization, 8.5, 8.5, 9, 8.5, 8.5. Team representing Mexico will be performing a 205B, group difficulty 3. Judges' scores for execution, 5, 6, 7, 6.5. For synchronization, 7, 7.5, 7.5, 7, 7.5. Judges' scores for execution, 7, 6.5, 8, 8.5. Synchronization, 7.5, 7.5, 8, 7.5, 7.5. The team from Australia will be performing a 405B, group difficulty 3. Judges' scores for execution, 7, 8, 8, 8. Synchronization, 8, 8.5, 8.5, 8.5, 8. The team representing China will also be performing a 405B, group difficulty 3. Judges' scores for execution, 8.5, 8, 9, 8.5. Synchronization, 9, 8.5, 9, 9, 9. From Ukraine, we're performing a 5152B, group difficulty 3. Judges' scores for execution, 7.5, 7, 7.5, 7. For synchronization, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5, 8, 7.5. Next up, the team representing Canada will be performing a 107B, degree of difficulty 3.1. Judges' scores for execution, 7.5, 7, 7.5, 8.5. Synchronization, 8, 8, 8, 7.5, 7. Team representing Mexico will be performing a 5-1, 5-2B, degree of difficulty 3. Judges' scores for execution, 7.5, 7.5, 8, 7. Synchronization, 8, 7.5, 8, 8, 8. Team from Great Britain will be performing a 205B, degree of difficulty 3. Judges' scores for execution, 6.5, 7.5, 7, 8. Synchronization, 8.5, 8.5, 8.5, 8.5, 8. Next up, the team representing Australia will be performing a 107B, degree of difficulty 3.1. Judges' scores for execution, 6, 6, 8, 8. Synchronization, 7, 6.5, 7, 7, 7.5. The team representing China will be performing a 305B, degree of difficulty 3. Judges' scores for execution, 7.5, 9, 7.5, 8. For synchronization, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8.5. Overall ranking, China leading at the moment, ahead of Canada, Great Britain and Mexico, really tight. Here we go, the final dive here, women's 3-metre synchro springboard competition. Team from Ukraine will be performing a 107B, degree of difficulty 3.1. Judges' scores for execution, 7.5, 7, 7, 7. Synchronization, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5, 7. Their final dive, the team representing Canada will be performing a 5-1, 5-2B, degree of difficulty 3. Judges' scores for execution, 8, 8, 7.5, 8. Synchronization, 8s across the board. Team representing Mexico, performing a 405B, degree of difficulty 3. Judges' Judges' scores for execution, 7.5 across the board. Great judging. For synchronization, 8, 8.5, 8.5, 8.5, 7.5. Their final dive, the team representing Great Britain will be performing a 107B, group difficulty 3.1. Judges' scores for execution, 6.5, 6.5, 7, 6.5. Synchronization, 7.5, 7, 7.5, 7, 7. Next up, the team representing Australia will be performing a 5.152B, group difficulty 3. Judges' scores for execution, 7.5, 8, 8, 8. Synchronization, 8, 7.5, 8, 8, 8. And final dive here, representing China, forming a 205B, degree of difficulty 3. Judges' scores for execution, 9, 8.5, 9, 9. Synchronization, 9.5, 9. And it will be gold to China. That total score of 338.10. Fantastic final dive, saving their best for last as well. Beautifully executed. Back 2.5 somersault. Will be Canada finishing with the silver. See Jennifer Abel and Pamela Ware there, 315.51. Mexico, Carla Espinoza, Boris Hernandez, rounding out the podium, place getters, 303.90. Once again, China keeps their winning ways going here. 3 from 3 here at our FINA NBC Diving World Series in Dubai for 2015. Big congratulations to Wu Mingxia and Chi Miao.